I mean, I've surveyed for hellbenders a lot, working hard, and you're lucky if you can even catch a couple in a day. And back in the 70s and 80s, they would be finding a hellbender under every third rock they look under, you know. So I can't imagine the volume and the numbers that they had seen. I mean, Missouri had tens of thousands of hellbenders out there, and our estimates today are around 2,200 animals left in the wild. And so this big decline that we see, we don't see very little recruitment, little guys. We've worked very hard with all of our conservation partners to develop conservation plans, recovery plans. We immediately listed Ozark and Eastern hellbenders as state endangered in 2003 in our state to further protect them under those laws. And but we also knew when we looked at all the data, we did what's called habitat modeling, population habitat viability assessments, where we modeled populations under different scenarios as a flooding, disease, different outcomes. And basically what we saw when we modeled these things in the mid-2000s is this animal's going extinct. There's no doubt it's going extinct. In every model we would run, they're going extinct. Meantime, we started trying to breed hellbenders at the St. Louis Zoo back in the mid-2000s. We failed at first. Females laid eggs, but then the males wouldn't fertilize them. Their sperm did not look good. We tested things, did things. We changed up the ionic concentrations at the zoo. We've learned quickly that conductivity plays a large role in activating sperm in males, and especially in amphibians, aquatic. And plus we have stream team units that pick up the trash. It's always good to get the trash out of the river. You don't want tires in the river. You don't want people's radios with rusty batteries dropped in the river. You want to take those out. Just keep the river clean, and try to keep trees along the edge of the river. Protect the riparian zone. The planting of trees maintains the river channel as narrow. It flushes the channel better. As the trees are removed, water flows into the river much faster. It brings in sediments and fines. So think about the trees along the edge of the rivers that are there. They stabilize the banks. They're like a coffee filter. When it rains very hard, it slows down the rain. And when you make impervious surfaces along rivers more and more, the flow of water just goes faster and faster, and it can do more damage to the river. It's not buffered. And you see that even in a city. I mean, everything's paved. It goes fast down a road until it gets underneath the roads. I mean, surfaces that are not made to slow down rainfall and absorb it will cause more catastrophic flooding in the future. So keeping the trees on the river will protect the property and protect the river so much more in the long run. So it's good. Now, if I was other animals, but it's, breeding seasons for all animals that you try to propagate or rear, it is going to be different. I mean, you might know a lot more about breeding snakes. I mean, it's a little bit different. Trying to propagate a big aquatic salamander in water takes a big footprint. You can't just do it in a closet. It's not going to happen that way. I mean, you can do that with some lizards and snakes and other stuff. I mean, turtles are even harder. You just got to have a bigger footprint to do that. But everything in general, they have their timing of mating, especially in the wild. Certain species, I mean, this is frogs and salamanders, mostly made here in Missouri in late winter, early spring into early summer. So that's their window. So the photo period is crucial to when they're going to start their cycling. Air temperature, rain definitely moves animals to wetlands to breed. So there's all types of triggers out there environmentally to help with reproduction, especially with aquatic species, mass migrating species.
So today we are talking to Jeff Briggler of Missouri's State Herpetologist. Now, what does a herpetologist do, and how do you become a herpetologist?
Well, I'll start off with how to become a herpetologist. It requires quite a bit of school. I mean, you're definitely going to have a bachelor's degree. Most agencies now require a minimum of a master's degree. And I actually do have my PhD degree. And as time goes on, it's probably going to be more people with PhD degrees. And so basically you have those degrees, but you need to really be working in the field of herpetology during graduate school. So working with an amphibian or reptile project at that time. And I would strongly encourage people who want to be in this field. I mean, just because you have a degree and you might have studied one or two animals, you better learn a lot about the life histories of all the animals, because that's going to determine a lot of things in jobs and requirements. So not only do you have to have a strong background in herpetology, but you better have a pretty good background in some geology, plants, community types like forest, grasslands. All of these animals are tied to these community types. So I would strongly encourage anybody wanting to be in this field to make sure you take as many plant courses as you can and geology courses, because animals are where they're at by the rocks and soil compositions that are out there, to learn more. So what does a herpetologist do in an agency? Well, it varies a lot in the different agencies, but you're really a coordinator for the state and knowing everything that's occurring within that state. You could sum it up in a way that you might be the attorney of the amphibians and reptiles. Basically, you're representing them at the table in all management decisions. So in my job, it varies a lot. I do conduct a lot of research projects in the state, or I oversee them with hiring staff or other people doing those. I do produce a lot of outreach and education materials, and heavily involved with regulations down the line. A lot of the regulations that are in our books are from previous individuals, but changes in those. So basically, you're just the go-to person for herpetology questions, especially the more detailed things that occur in the state.
So do you keep yourself? Because I talked to Scott Billard. And he talked about, not every herpetologist keeps like he does. And both of you talked about having a breeding season. What was that?
Like, what do you mean by a breeding season? Sorry.
Is it actually for the state, or is it personal, or like, do you even keep reptiles yourself, or?
I don't have anything currently. I used to keep some salamanders because programs that I would give, it's harder to find salamanders for programs. But a lot of the programs we have nature centers that have animals on display and used for education. So a lot of times I can borrow those individuals. Now, granted, I will have a few animals occasionally because of work moving things before, but for years I would raise a lot of the ambystoma salamanders, especially to see how long. My tiger salamander that I hatched from an egg, it survived a little over 13 years, which was kind of cool, although the record is almost 21 years for the ambystoma salamanders. And I've had raised marbles. Marbles are easy to breed. They don't require water to mate, so they will mate outside. So in an aquarium, if you have a male and a female, they'll typically mate and lay eggs. You can put those eggs in water, they'll hatch and develop. But most of them don't. So I've really kept more salamanders really in my job and over the careers, more due to those are the harder ones to get for programs. A snake, I can just go to a nature center and borrow one, so I don't have to keep up with those. And plus, I mean, I have a family. I have 3 kids. I'm busy. I'm running around all the time, so I can't have a big amount of animals to keep either. So
I understand. Yeah. So let's go ahead and get into the laws and stuff. And I have found. Okay, this is just a neat little one. I found some sites that I liked. This is just for, comedy's sake. So, bear wrestling in Missouri is illegal. This is such government overreach. I just can't believe they would have such government overreach in bear wrestling. It just ruined my whole summer.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't know about those type of regulations. I deal with the amphibians and reptiles. Yeah, I mean, I would have to look those up to determine what's in there, but
Yeah, that was funny.
yeah.
I just thought that was just one of the most unique ones that I have ever found. That I was just like, what is this?
Yeah.
But
Well,
this,
you should contact somebody back that knows more about those type questions. So
see, this one is so you need a permit to actually keep basically anything local for Missouri. You said this kind of stuff is from your predecessor.
well, a lot of these breeder permits. So there's a lot of different laws in every state relating to amphibians and reptiles and other animals. I can speak more specifically to amphibians and reptiles. So it just depends. If you're a resident of Missouri, meaning you have citizenship of Missouri, you're allowed to pick up 5 individuals of certain species from the wild to keep as pets. So 5 means you can have 2 box turtles, 1 glass lizard, 2 prairie lizards, and a red milk snake.
But
Now,
you have to get a permit.
No, just no permits required for Missouri residents to possess up to 5. Now, there's exemptions to these, what you can and can't have under those 5s as a Missouri citizen. So exemptions include you cannot take state endangered animals from the wild, period. So that's like Blanding's turtles, yellow mud turtles, Hellbenders, Massasauga rattlesnakes, western chicken turtles, Mississippi green water snakes. In addition to, there's other very rare snakes in the state that cannot be picked up under this rule, for like the dusty hognose snakes, the Kirtland snake, the western and eastern fox snakes, and alligator snapping turtle. So there's no way to possess those legally under that rule as a Missouri resident. And also you cannot take like common snapping turtles, soft shells, bullfrogs, or green frogs under this rule because those are game species. So you'd have to possess a hunting or fishing license in order to possess those. So if you did catch a snapping turtle and you wanted to keep one, as long as you had a valid fishing license every year, you could keep one under that rule that way. So that's what Missouri citizens can do. Now, under that rule that you can have 5 from the wild, they cannot come off public lands. So you can't go and target the Forest Service land or Fish and Wildlife Service or conservation, a state park. They have to come off of somebody's private property or their land, and they need to give you permission to take those if you want under that rule. Also under that rule, those cannot be exported outside the state because that's considered commercialized. They cannot be bought, sold. There can be no commercial value attained to those. And basically this rule allows people to enjoy a few of Missouri's wild animals, not too many, but at the same point not commercialize it that becomes a market business over time. So that's that rule. Now, there's other means to get in animals under, like you stated earlier, the Class 1 and Class 2 breeder permits. And those are a little bit different. These are people that are physically wanting to keep animals. It could be a hobby, or physically breed them, because under the 5 rule, you cannot breed. Those animals cannot be used for breeding that are taken from the wild. Under the Class 1 and Class 2 breeder permit, there is a approved list of what can be imported in. So you first have to follow that list. So under these 2, Class 1 are the non-venomous amphibian and reptiles, since we're speaking about those. Class 2 are our venomous species. So there's different rules under each one. One's more dangerous than the other one. So under the Class 1, it's the harmless one. So let's just say you want to breed.
Well, I see the 5-line skink, the western and eastern hognose snake. Yeah,
I mean, there's a bigger list. Yeah, I don't have the list right in front of me. So in order to breed and stuff, you have to purchase these animals or obtain them legally from a source other than the wild of Missouri. So they're not used from the wild. It protects our wild populations. Then you apply for those permits, putting those animals on there. Then once you get that permit, those animals that you have that are approved on that list, you can breed them and sell them to other individuals with breeder permits in the state. You can sell them outside the state. It's basically you have to show proof of receipt of where they came from to make sure they did not originate from the wild. Class 2 is the venomous species. They are protected in our state from being picked up under the 5 rule also. But for the venomous, it's a little more. There is a test you have to take. I mean, you definitely have to take meet confinement standards and safety features too. There's a little bigger step here from a safety standpoint for individuals to do that. And people do. They do apply for this permit. So once they get some copperheads or timber rattlesnakes that they legally attain from somewhere, then they can breed and sell those individuals out of those permits. So there's kind of 2 different avenues. There's kind of a Missouri citizen can have a few for pets with some stipulations, and then the people that are actually wanting to keep long-term breed animals, sell animals under these breeder permits.
So if somebody from out of state came in and had hognose, would that be legal to sell?
No, they would. In order for them to do that, they would first have to apply for a breeder permit, a Class 1 breeder permit, and then claim that snake, show the legal paperwork that they were moving here, and then once it's under that, then they would be legal.
What about for like an expo? Like if
well, expos are a little bit different. Okay. It depends. Now, if you're in Missouri and you have a Class 1 breeder permit, let's just say you're selling hognose snakes at an expos in this state, and you're a current resident of Missouri, you have a breeder permit to sell. So under that permit, you could legally sell in expos in the state. Now, the question comes into play is anybody that's purchasing those that lives within Missouri would actually also have to possess that permit too before they could legally buy it. If they live outside the state, they can legally buy that. They have a 48-hour window to depart our state to show proof of receipt, but they're not staying in Missouri. But then they got to meet the laws of the adjacent state they're moving to and what import and exports are. So that's one mean. Now, if you lived outside of our state and wanted to sell at an expos that are native species, if they're not native, we're not going to regulate those. So let's say you live in some other state, you're coming to Missouri, and you want to sell in the expos, and it's hognose snakes that we are native to Missouri. The only legal mean then is you have to consign those wildlife, which would be consign those snakes to a current breeder holder. And you will be at their booth with them, and you can sell them through their consignment. You're basically consigning it to an individual to allow you to sell. But then the same rules apply after that. Anybody that's a Missouri resident has to have a breeder permit. Or if you're leaving the state, you have 48 hours to get that out, and then you have to make sure you know the laws of the adjacent states before you move into those. So there's different ways of doing that. So that's how it kind of shakes out.
That's actually quite fascinating. I didn't realize such details because, yeah.
It's very detail orientated because, I mean, we all like our amphibians and reptiles. I mean, there are some people that love them too much and want to pick them all up. Don't think there's not. I know I've got people that I know. There are some that are very mindful. They only want a handful, So the biggest thing is protecting the wild population, allowing people to enjoy the animals. But at the same time, when it becomes commercialized or market value, you have to protect your wild populations.
Yeah.
Or if not, it'll get very large in size.
So moving to conservation, there was a video, like Missouri, I think, has some of the better conservation in the country. Just from the parks and everything that I've seen, but I'm not sure if that's 100% correct because I haven't seen a ton of the other world, but one of the things that I took away from a video that I saw, there's actually like 13 towns in Missouri that have less than 6 people in them. And some of the big things that I took away from that video, because there was like 3 or 4 towns that had 0 people, and almost every single one of those towns had flooding issues. And I'm wondering if that itself also contributes to the fact of we just can't build up Missouri. And so our conservation's protected because of that. What do you think?
Well, in Missouri, I mean, I'm not a Missouri native, born in Missouri. I was born in another state and moved here when I got my job, but they do have strong public support here. We have a dedicated sales tax that was passed in the late 70s that provides funding for the conservation department. So not only do we have hunting and fishing sales, but we have this dedicated sales tax that actually helps our conservation. And other states have that too now. Arkansas has one. Some of the northern states have some tax base. So the states that have these type of conditions can rely on a little extra funding to help support both game and non-game activities more. So I think in general we're a good situation in the central part of the state, and that sales tax has been very beneficial to hunting and fishing and other non-game animals in our states for many, many decades.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that get upset. Like the Missouri Conservation Facebook group, they posted about 8 bears that were shot, black bears, and it's like those people were shot legally. They had permits because the black bear population was rising, so it's actually beneficial because they don't have any predators, kind of thing. So those type of conservation things, even if people don't like them, they're actually beneficial to conservation as a whole.
Yeah, I can't really speak to that because I don't know enough. I mean, I know more about the amphibian reptile regulations and stuff.
And we definitely don't want to, like I was telling people, like the Hellbenders are the basically canary in a coal mine. If we lose Hellbenders, then the pollution in the water's got to be high, and if we're not losing them and we're gaining them, then the pollution in the water is probably pretty low. Is that correct?
I mean, I work a lot with Hellbenders, and I mean, there's a lot of reasons for their decline in the state. Historically, large number of animals were illegally collected, but changes in habitat and water quality over time. As the habitat changes, siltation occurs and the rivers widen. Basically, their habitat is getting choked out. And then on top of that, you have diseases like chytrid fungus that are out there that impacts Hellbenders too. So it's a combination, but they are long-lived animals if they can absorb everything through the water. And so tremendous changes in water quality are their habitat that's in the river, the large rocky areas. If that gets suffocated over time, yes, this animal's at risk. And so we do spend a lot of time studying this animals on looking at the impacts of habitat and water quality, disease impacts, and other factors that occur. But definitely the changes in habitat over time due to the lack of riparian protection a lot of times can lead to changes in the river that impacts Hellbenders as well as the other aquatic life in those systems.
Yeah. What are some of the things you do to save Hellbenders, and what can we take away from that to help other people understand conservation and maybe do better with conservation in other states or for themselves?
Well, I mean, Hellbenders have been around for millions of years, and there's 2 different types currently recognized in the U.S. The Ozark Hellbenders that occur in southern Missouri and northern Arkansas, and then the eastern Hellbender occurs in Missouri and 15 other states. So they've been a part of our ecosystem for many, many, many years. What we've seen in Missouri, Hellbenders have been studied since the 70s in Missouri. We have a lot of historical baseline. So when I started my job 22 years ago, the previous state herpetologist was finishing up a survey of Hellbenders, and what those surveys have shown were that we were under dramatic declines of Hellbenders in this state, 70 to 80% across the board. I mean, I've surveyed for Hellbenders a lot, working hard, and you're lucky if you can even catch a couple in a day. And back in the 70s and 80s, they would be finding a Hellbender under every third rock they look under, you know. So I can't imagine the volume and the numbers that they had seen. I mean, Missouri had tens of thousands of Hellbenders out there, and our estimates today are around 2,200 animals left in the wild. And so this big decline that we see, we don't see very little recruitment, little guys. We've worked very hard with all of our conservation partners to develop conservation plans, recovery plans. We immediately listed Ozark and Eastern Hellbenders as state endangered in 2003 in our state to further protect them under those laws. And but we also knew when we looked at all the data, we did what's called habitat modeling, population habitat viability assessments, where we modeled populations under different scenarios as a flooding, disease, different outcomes. And basically what we saw when we modeled these things in the mid-2000s is this animal's going extinct. There's no doubt it's going extinct. In every model we would run, they're going extinct. And so we looked at the window. We felt like we had about 12 to 15 years to try to halt it or reverse it before there's enough animals left. So looking then at that point, we decided to really heavily invest in propagation efforts, and which led us to working really strongly with the St. Louis Zoo, some of our hatchery folks at the conservation department too. And so our goal was to originally breed Hellbenders in captivity, take a handful from the wild. So we would take 8 to 10 animals per certain rivers and put them in an artificial stream at the St. Louis Zoo and work on that. In the meantime, we're actively searching for eggs in the wild, because if we find eggs, we're going to head start them. Just like anybody would do, find eggs with turtles that are declining. We head start animals. So raise them up to a size to give them a chance, because when eggs hatch of any animal, even if 200 or 300 hatch out, the odds of 1 or 2 of those making it to adulthood to breed are very unlikely. I mean, very low. So anything you can give them a boost. So we're looking for eggs in the wild. I'll have to say historically, very few eggs were ever found on Hellbenders in our wild. And it's kind of a combination of, yeah, they had Hellbenders everywhere, but they weren't really searching for eggs very hard, and they really didn't have the means to search for them. I mean, 70, 80 years ago, dive suits and masks and snorkels are a lot better now than they were back then. And so I found my first eggs in the wild in 2006. You're very elated when you find one clutch that people have told me for years you're not going to find any. I've gotten a lot better at it. I, on average, find about 15 nests a year now. So they are breeding in the wild. They are reproducing. So we're getting very good at finding eggs. And in the meantime, we started trying to breed Hellbenders at the St. Louis Zoo back in the mid-2000s. We failed at first. Females laid eggs, but then the males wouldn't fertilize them. Their sperm did not look good. We tested things, did things. We changed up the ionic concentrations at the zoo. We've learned quickly that conductivity plays a large role in activating sperm in males, and especially in amphibians, aquatic species. Doing some changes in their shelter rock changes, and just having hands off. Don't mess with them anymore. We're not going to physically grab these animals. We touch them all the time. You got to leave them alone if you want to breed them. You just can't keep messing with them. So, and finally in 2011, if you've seen the press, if you go back in 2011, the St. Louis Zoo officially bred Ozark Hellbenders, the first time that's ever occurred, and in the world. And it made world press at that time, all over the world. And media requests were just a lot of media requests occurred at that time. Since that time, we have consistently bred Hellbenders at the St. Louis Zoo up to this year. Only 1 year we have not in the last 10 years. But that year we were changing out brood stock. We can't keep breeding the same males and females. We can't inundate all these brothers and sisters. So we're constantly collecting eggs from different spots, new genetics, mixing up our genetics. We want very diverse genetics. And if you would ask me in 2005, could we save Hellbenders in Missouri? My answer would have been, I don't know. It looks bleak. But now where we're at, we're buying this animal a whole generation, 30, 40 years now. And so by releasing animals that we've raised in captivity, and not only, we're not at that point where, some people have a bottleneck. Well, we only have this many males and females, so we got to keep breeding them even though they're all related. We're not at that point. We strategize to find different eggs from different parents, mixing up the genetics very well. And so what that has led to, our first release of captive raised Hellbenders occurred in 2008. This year marked our 10,000th animal released into the wild in Missouri.
Amazing.
And we will continue that. I mean, maybe another decade. It won't continue forever. The plan is not to always do that. We'll monitor the populations, start hoping to see a reverse in their trajectory in the wild, and maybe slightly pull back on propagation and be a little slower. It's like any programs. There's a lot of money invested into these propagation facilities, but you don't want to raise too many too fast, because sometimes putting too much out there causes other problems. It might cause diseases to become a bigger issue. So you really want to take a slow approach. And plus, Hellbenders are a long-lived animal. We know they can live about 30 years, maybe a little older, and they might even live longer than that.
Wow.
I think over time we'll learn that they can live longer, just like we've learned recently timber rattlesnakes can live well in their 40s, not just 25, 30 years anymore in some states. So these animals, some of them are probably living longer than we think, because a lot of animals get tagged now, and it's just going to take many decades for someone to catch one that they know the confirmed age, because it's very hard to know confirmed ages of most amphibians and reptiles if you didn't know when they were first born. So there's a lot of success stories in Hellbenders. We're working on restoring habitat out there the best we can, augmenting habitat in places. And what we know on releases today is we catch some of these animals. The ones we catch, we do know they can produce sperm, viable sperm. We've tested that. We've caught females that when we ultrasound them have eggs in them. So we know they're growing. Now we want to prove that they're actively reproducing in the wild. And that's very hard to prove because the daddy Hellbender guards the eggs when they're laid. So, and he's usually the father of those nests. Well, the mother will come in, lay her eggs. He fertilizes them like fish, sprays sperm on them, then he leaves. So you release all these Hellbenders knowing survivorship's going to be very low, but you got to find a needle in a haystack. I'm telling you, I can find 15 nests a year working very hard. That's 15 for the year. One of these days, I'm hoping I'll find that one male that we released that was raised at the St. Louis Zoo that we know fertilized the egg clutch that he's guarding. And normally, if that male is guarding those eggs and tending to them, those are his babies. Now, we would really want to know that genetically to prove for sure. And the best way to do that is take a tissue sample, a non-lethal tissue sample from the father and a baby or two, run the genetics through a lab, and they can tell us if this guy guarding this nest is the father of the babies. And so as we release animals, we want to see our population monitoring efforts increase, finding more animals. We want to start seeing some confirmed reproduction by those. And we want to we want to start seeing more nests found in the wild, and then we want to start seeing populations growing. And it just takes time. I mean, it's going to take a couple of decades for all of that to occur. But we also have to be realistic. If Missouri's rivers held 44,000 hellbenders historically, does the habitat still exist today to support that number? And it's very unlikely. We've had land use changes. Things change on these rivers. I mean, the realistic goal is probably about half of that. The carrying capacity for these rivers are probably more closer to 20 to 22,000 for the self-sustain. So you have to keep a lot of that in mind. And then on another really positive note, just like we want to confirm breeding in the wild, well, we've raised hellbenders in captivity from eggs collected from the wild. We've actually used those to breed at the St. Louis Zoo. Those animals have had no problems with breeding. So we know that the animals we're releasing can reproduce because they have done it in captivity. So there's just been a lot of positive take-home messages for hellbenders. And we're just hoping the next 5 years the numbers start looking better. We're hoping we can confirm reproduction in the wild multiple times. And we're just hoping we start finding a few more nests. And then if we start seeing all that, you're talking about an 8 to 10 year delay, then numbers should start reversing in the wild. And so there's definitely a lot that goes on. There's a huge group of partners involved with hellbender conservation. I mean, definitely I mentioned the St. Louis Zoo with all the propagation, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Both hellbenders in Missouri are federally listed endangered. The National Park Service, the Forest Service, the military base here are all partners with conserving hellbenders in our state, and a lot of citizens. We have a lot of concerned citizens, a lot of citizens that actually actively help us with things by giving us access to the river through their property to work on hellbenders. And plus we have stream team units that pick up the trash. It's always good to get the trash out of the river. You don't want tires in the river. You don't want people's radios with rusty batteries dropped in the river. You want to take those out. Just keep the river clean, and try to keep trees along the edge of the river. Protect the riparian zone. The planting of trees maintains the river channel as narrow. It flushes the channel better. As the trees are removed, water flows into the river much faster. It brings in sediments and fines. So think about the trees along the edge of the rivers that are there. They stabilize the banks. They're like a coffee filter. When it rains very hard, it slows down the rain. And when you make impervious surfaces along rivers more and more, the flow of water just goes faster and faster, and it can do more damage to the river. It's not buffered. And you see that even in a city. I mean, everything's paved. It goes fast down a road until it gets underneath the roads. I mean, surfaces that are not made to slow down rainfall and absorb it will cause more catastrophic flooding in the future. So keeping the trees on the river will protect the property and protect the river so much more in the long run.
Okay, that's great. I think that's a super important message. Conductivity is interesting. I've got degrees in physics and chemistry. So, I mean, if you were to raise up salamanders, conductivity of water, how important is that for like keepers?
Well, I think it's going to depend on the animal. It's very important in totally aquatic species. I think it would be very important for mud puppies, hellbenders, any really totally aquatic ones that just cannot leave the water. I mean, it's very well published in the fish literature that conductivity to water helps to activate sperm. And if you're not activating enough of it, the odds of fertilizing all the eggs drop tremendously. So it's good. Now, if I was other animals, but it's, breeding seasons for all animals that you try to propagate or rear, it is going to be different. I mean, you might know a lot more about breeding snakes. I mean, it's a little bit different. trying to propagate a big aquatic salamander in water takes a big footprint. You can't just do it in a closet. It's not going to happen that way. I mean, you can do that with some lizards and snakes and other stuff. I mean, turtles are even harder. You just got to have a bigger footprint to do that. But everything in general, you know, they have their timing of mating, especially in the wild. Certain species, I mean, this is frogs and salamanders, mostly made here in Missouri in late winter, early spring into early summer. So that's their window. So the photo period is crucial to when they're going to start their cycling. Air temperature, rain definitely moves animals to wetlands to breed. So there's all types of triggers out there environmentally to help with reproduction, especially with aquatic species, mass migrating species. Now, a lot of the snakes, you know, they prefer, some species really prefer to mate in the spring. Some really prefer to mate in the fall before they go overwintering. Personally, I think a lot of snakes, they may have a confined period when they mate, but I think they take advantage of mating when the opportunity arises throughout the year. And they can store sperm for a long time. A lot of these, I mean, some snakes can do parthenogenesis, and lizards where they don't where they don't have to have a male, like a lot of the whiptails out in southwest deserts. And sometimes in captivity, you can have a snake, you know, you see it in the literature, it's parthenogenesis. The female found a way to reproduce and have viable young. Well, you really got to look at the genetics of that too. There's been so many times where we've had a snake in captivity for 6 or 7 years, and it's never all of a sudden magically produced live births 1 year. And everybody thinks it's automatically parthenogenesis. Well, being a scientist like I am too, I mean, I'm not going to say it's not, because it does happen, but you really need to take a tissue sample of those young and the adults. And when we run those, 95% of the time, it had a father. That female has been storing sperm for 6, 7, 8 years. And those that breed these animals, I mean, they know, the people that breed, things that they need to do in cycling. There's very massive books out there on the reproductive cycles of reptiles and amphibians. One mode does not fit all.
No.
But I do like how some things have to have mass migrations, like spotted salamanders to a wetland to get a breeding frenzy to occur, or all these frogs have to go to a wetland and call and attract more to get this to occur. Whereas snakes and lizards, I mean, I see all the time in the literature, this species of snake, like the Massasauga, really likes breeding in the fall and autumn. Well, that's not really the case. They breed just as much in the spring. And box turtles, you see box turtles mating in spring, and you see a lot of them. But I'm going to tell you, I see box turtles mating in my yard in August, September, October. Again, here they're more solitary animals. They don't need a massive amount of individuals like frogs and salamanders to start a big breeding chorus. So since they're more solitary, I think as they approach animals through time, they take advantage of mating, and because they can store sperm for a certain amount of time until that female is heavy enough to put on babies or to lay eggs in the future. So I just think when you're a solitary animal, you take advantage of it, and it's a different reproductive strategy, but it's one that's not tying you to a wetland, because if somebody destroys that pond, well, that pond's gone forever until you build a new one. And so every animal is different. They all have their challenges. I always tell people, even in my job, trying to conserve and manage amphibians and reptiles, we can study animals a lot and know all these research and scientific information, and it's all good information. But I'm going to tell you, if you don't know the basic life history of that animal, you can't do the best job on managing and conserving or breeding. You've got to understand why that animal wants to travel 200 meters that time of year, why that animal's doing this. All of those are innate in that animal. Why does it like eating this? These are innate properties. So you better understand the general life history of these animals, because that's going to determine propagating them. That's going to determine how to manage for them. Yeah, this salamander goes in this pond and breeds, but it spends 95% of its life 200 meters away from this pond in a forest landscape. Not a grassland landscape, a forest. So knowing, just being very good at life history of these animals and why they do what they do actually is very, very important to the conservation of these animals. And I'm sure it is for other animals too. And you think we live in North America. You think we know everything about these animals' life histories? No. There are still salamander species in North America that their eggs have never been discovered in the wild. Never. No one knows. The Ozark zigzag salamanders, an Ozark endemic to Missouri, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. I was actually fortunate to document the first deposition of eggs for that species in 1999 because it had never been discovered, and documenting incubation of the parent, how long, all the life histories of it. But there are still several salamander species, some in Missouri, definitely a lot of cave-dwelling salamanders that we don't know what time of year they lay eggs. We don't know what their eggs look like. There might be some stuff published due to being induced in captivity that shows some descriptions, but again, I mean, just think about snakes in general. Some snakes are hard to find. I mean, snakes are not easy to find eggs. You're fortunate when you do. A lot of times it's due to someone cutting down a tree or moving something, destroying something that you find them. But if you could tell me I could go out and just look for eggs of snakes and just find a clutch of eggs of snakes tomorrow, it's not going to happen that easy. Snakes hide their eggs very well. In some species, it's speculative how they lay them. I mean, some species that are in forests lay them under large rocks or in rotting logs. But if you live in a sandy prairie area, they usually don't lay a nest type. They usually slide deep into the sand and just lay like a line of eggs in a row because of the habitat. So again, I go back to learn their life histories, learn your geology, soil composition, learn your plant communities. It all ties back into the conservation of those animals.
And that's I personally don't think we're doing enough of that in the community, the herpetoculture community. I would like to see some changes, some laws or something that might make it to where you have to get a license to even own a knoll or something. Where, because I've met people that don't even know how to read a light bulb. And it's understanding that and then going, okay, so these are the basics that you absolutely should know before getting an exotic animal. Conductivity is something I don't think a lot of people might think of when getting a fish or something. And I think I've lost my shrimp because of the water quality here in the apartment. And so how do we get laws passed in Missouri? How does that work?
Well, it just depends. I mean, we regulate the native amphibians and reptiles, not the non-natives. So basically, the brunt of the animals in Missouri that your people keep as pets, they're purchasing non-native species. And so for like native stuff, I mean, we try our best to put information out there. Our previous herpetologist, Tom Johnson, actually wrote a care manual on native stuff. Now, we probably need to update it. I mean, you can find stuff online, but I mean, there are a lot of books out there. I'm not going to say there's not. I do get a lot of phone calls for people even call me. I bought this online and it's a non-native. What should I do? I do have pretty good reference books, but you pay for what you get. The more expensive ones are really the ones that the problems most people run into is disease issues or why my animal won't eat. And there are some really good books out there on vet care, that things you can do, but you know, a lot of it is you eventually have to go to a vet and hope they know stuff about amphibians and reptiles too.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a lot of education for sure in the horticultural world because we regulate our natives and not the non-natives too. Our focus is going to be on the native species, but helping even the herpetoculture people producing good pamphlets on care of certain species. I mean, getting that information out. Those are the people that do this. We, as an agency, we're only propagating animals one of two ways usually. It's a dire strait to save that animal from being extinct in the wild, or it's a very rare animal. We want to figure out how to propagate it now while there's enough and document how to do it and save that in case we need it. And I don't think that's an area where we've done a lot of, just in general, done a good job of getting information out in the long run is writing that. And what happens in even our world and even the horticultural world, does anybody really publish what went wrong?
That's a horrifying mistake that literally I try to do it, but then when you do it, you get so much criticism that it's like that's why people don't do it, because people just attack them. And it's like,
yeah, and that's, I mean, it's just like anything. We do an introduction, and of course we want to see it succeed, but if it doesn't work, we have to be honest, it doesn't,
Yeah.
and learn from that. And that's the thing, is failures on propagating animals, raising animals, should be just as important as successes, because it will open the door. I'll just go back to things we learned that people have told me, you're not going to succeed in that. How to determine sex or gender of a baby hellbender when it's this big. Well, hellbenders, you really can't sex them through the time of year in the fall when they're breeding, and the males put on a big donut, the swollen cueca, and the females don't. But that's going to take somewhere between 6 and 10 years. Just like different animals, they put on external signs during that, for sure they're males and females. Well, at least in hellbenders, for years we try to get geneticists to crack the code on determining the sex gene. And it's not easy in amphibians. And it took us, and finally someone that went on to get his degree later on worked very hard on trying to figure out how to crack that code. And we did. And now we can tell the gender of a baby hellbender when it's first born, if it's boy or girl. So, but there was all these failures for like 10 years that it's not going to work. And sometimes those failures result in a new technique comes out that you didn't have back then. But I don't know. You really got to point out the failures you have over time, because people are going to learn from those failures. It's just like us when we're young. We fall off a wall and we hurt ourselves.
Yeah.
Which one are you going to learn the most from? You fell off the wall and hurt yourself, or your parents telling you, get away from that wall and don't fall off? Then you don't know nothing about that wall. and So you have to learn, and it should be part of the process along the way to do that. And there's going to always be, every species is different, and like in the husbandry things, and I mean some things can be grouped, when you're raising some non-native species and what they do, but others can't. And you know this as well as I do. Some species just need natural sunlight.
Yeah.
They need it. You can put a UV lamp in there all you want, but if you don't go out and give them some good natural sunlight for just in general, or in a window, and give them, and we changed our way of business, even our nature centers. We have some outdoor exposures. Some of these animals get walkabouts. They get outside in the summer. Just like anything, you can do all of this stuff. UV lights are great. I'm not going to say they don't give you what you need, but you can't totally replace natural sunlight.
You can't.
And I would always encourage people that raise these animals to do that. I mean, it's just like little tidbits. I always have calls like, my turtle won't eat and it's starving to death. Well, how do you know it's starving? Did you weigh it when you first got it? Because you can't just look at it. You have to weigh that animal to have some measure, maybe take a few photographs And what I usually see, and not usually long-term herpetoculture people, it's more individuals that don't have a lot of experience, is most often people are going to overfeed their animals and they become obese. And unfortunately in the herpetoculture world, and even animals on display, I mean, we get people from the public, this snake is not healthy, it looks bad, and I get pictures of it and I'm like, oh my gosh, here's one that looks like what it should from the wild that I catch. The image in a lot of people's heads are obese snakes they see, and they're not the healthy ones. And see, there's another thing right there. I'm sure it's out there, but we don't talk about it enough to say, no, when someone complains these snakes are not healthy, I always go back and look at a healthy snake that I've captured from the wild and look at those photographs, look at their lengths and weights, and look at that and say, no, actually, this is the snake in that ideal weight class that we want. A lot of people know when I go around, I'll say obese, obese, obese. You can overfeed amphibians and reptiles. They don't know when their last meal is coming. They will keep eating. In most cases. Yeah.
It's astonishing to me how many people with bearded dragons don't realize that you should make them have to climb. You should put things in there so that they're getting that exercise, not just a stagnant like rock that they can easily climb, but something that forces them to climb to get that extra exercise. Some of the issues that people don't understand is groupthink doesn't usually solve problems. What it does is it tells you what doesn't work. It's the fastest way to find what doesn't work. And so that's why you usually get that one person that solves it, and it's not actually the full group that solves it, it's that one individual. And that's always been an interesting thing. Now, when they're making laws for reptiles and stuff, do they consult you?
Yeah, as part of the state herpetologist, yes, I will be aware of it. If people suggest changes to laws, I mean, I will probably obtain that information, and look into it. I mean, it's just like anything. We do our homework. The law is going to be changed. We have to look at who's that going to impact out there? Who is it impacting something currently in Missouri? We don't regulate, like I said, we regulate the native species. So pet stores and stuff are regulated by the Department of Ag more. So it just depends on if it's native versus non-native. But definitely it would be coming across my desk at some point in time and to provide comments related to it, because, I mean, sometimes you want to change a law for good reasons. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes there are some good laws out there. Sometimes there's not. Some of the laws now, I mean, some of the bigger issues now are disease, Yeah. A lot of the diseases that are in the herpetoculture and the bait industries, and how to slow that down and not introducing it into the wild or impact your animals. And those are bigger laws on big shipments of animals that come in from around the world, and involve a lot more larger agency cooperations and other individuals. But in general, if it's related to Missouri and native species, yes, I will be aware of it at some point in time. And usually people call me and tell me too, and we'll have a conversation about it, because it might be something I've been keeping a radar look on and stuff, because sometimes things change over time. I mean, we're definitely watching diseases and how they come in and go. Yeah. So,
and that's an important thing. I'm trying to get some people on to try to help me talk about quarantine processes better, because I think the way we look at it is just completely off a little bit. Because basically, to a newcomer and to a lot of people, quarantine's either not important or it's just a time thing. And it's like, no, it's not just a time thing. You literally should have goals, and you need to be honest with yourself. So you got to be, hey, this is I'm not really good at this yet, or I've worked with this species, I understand this species better. And then it's like, so when you're honest with yourself and you have that knowledge, taking that time to keep them separated from your collection or whatnot. And then the 3 goals that you should always have when quarantining is measuring the health of the animal, getting the animal healthier than when you got it, and then making sure that any disease that your animals have or that animal has does not pass between each other. Would you say that's fair?
Oh, yeah, definitely fair. I mean, we deal with this with our nature centers that keep amphibians and reptiles, So we have quarantine protocols. The AZA network for the zoos have very detailed quarantine protocols. I mean, think about all these hellbenders we're raising at the zoo. They are major quarantine because we don't want thousands of animals to die due to introduced diseases. So even we like I do a lot of presentations on talking about quarantining animals in our nature centers. Now we're raising natives, so we don't have to worry about in some level, we know what we're getting, but we definitely quarantine animals. We test them, they quarantine in a dedicated room. They get their own dedicated containers. They don't go in with the general collection until a lot of disease testing is done. Now, we have a means to do that. Most people don't.
Yeah, really.
But we want to test them for snake fungal disease. We want to test them for chytrid fungus. We want to test them for Perkinsia. I mean, different, ranavirus before they go into those collections. We always are going to encourage separation of animals if you can. But at some point, once everything tests clean. But then you got to think about other things that occur. Well, it's people taking these animals out to do a program, but then somebody's bringing in a frog from the wild and they're touching that one as well as these we already quarantined. So you got to go through all of that, wearing gloves, contaminated water. Just because this animal is aquatic, it could be that water is a risk putting down that drain because it could be carrying something or the water it comes in. So and it's a hassle. But you should pour that water out on hot concrete or boil it to kill everything in it before you dump it down the sink to impact something else. And we don't think about those, but you could introduce a bacteria or fungus or a virus through the water that's going to impact native stuff. And that's going to some extreme in a way, but you got to think about that. And we always tell people, even our nature centers, and most of the people that keep them is, you have an order to feeding animals. And I hate to state it this way, but it is. Your most prized, dedicated animal that you do not want to lose should be your first one you care for that day. Because you're going from group to group to group. Which one is your prized, irreplaceable animal? And think about that in your feeding order or how you're going to feed. Or that one's only fed on a given day and then the other stuff is on another day. So there's always tons of things to think about. But just because someone comes up and gives us a box turtle and say, hey, I found this box turtle on the road, I thought y'all might want it. We're not going to take it. It's going to go back where it came from because we don't want it in our general collection because we've already tested everything for diseases. We've got everything as clean as we can. And you'll never, and I'll just be honest, it's hard to be 100% clean. The biggest threats are the substrates that come in, but the biggest threat is the food, especially if you're feeding live food. And even with hellbenders at the St. Louis Zoo, we quarantine the food and treat food in salt baths, other stuff that doesn't kill it because they want live stuff. But we do the best we can to sterilize things to prevent diseases. Now, can we present it 100% of the time? No. But we do everything possible that we can. Now, luckily, a lot of people that keep certain reptiles and stuff are feeding frozen, pinkies and fresh thaw and freezing process can kill a lot of stuff too. And but those are things you have to think about in general, and just a lot of things.
I've got videos on doing your fecals at home, so it helps save people money and stuff. But I just don't see a way for the general public, because I've worked for pharmaceuticals before, and it's like the HPLC machines that you might need for some of the diseases, or the knowledge that you really need for a microscope to see some, or just the different techniques that are needed to do a disease testing is just not something I don't know if we'll ever be able to truly get there for the public that I know of. But maybe
I think some you can. I mean, there are some good care books out there for the basics. You know, you can see wiggling parasites.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some things you can do, coloration, consistency, that will tell you if you're willing to at least get the basic books on health of those animals. But there's a point where you can't culture bacteria and fungus.
No.
There's a point you can't run DNA tests. I mean, it's going to require a vet, just like taking your dog or cat to look at it.
Most vets.
Well, some you need to do your homework. Some vets, I mean, some vets, their jobs are to do cats and dogs and that, and then some do cats and dogs and farm life, cows and horses, and then there's a handful out there that will do some amphibians and reptiles. I will say, I mean, these TV shows, I don't know what you think about them, but these vet shows that get into some exotics that are on TV a lot now, at least showing what can be done and highlighting it. But fecals would be very difficult beyond the basics.
Well, I'm not even talking about just fecals, but yet the diseases themselves.
Yeah, testing them, a lump in it. It's just like a lump in your dog. Is it cancerous? Is it not? Is it benign? Does it need to be removed? Luckily for me and stuff in our jobs, I mean, we have veterinarians on staff, but we also have pretty good access, especially when I work on Hellbenders at St. Louis Zoo. I mean, the zoos have long-term veterinarians that deal with a lot of species. Yeah. They know a lot about those species. And
see, that's an interesting thing, is that to collect and cultivate the actual samples of the mucus and stuff to figure out the diseases that might be in it is because when I went to school, I got into the master's program, and I got a bachelor's in polymer chemistry focused on medical tech. So I studied how to target cancer cells and Zika and Ebola, things like that. So you actually grow your own cancer cells, and you literally have to take the samples and figure out how to make a polymer that will actually attach to the actual the receptors on the cell. And so just cultivating itself is such a long process that like most vets, I don't think would do that. I don't know if I've ever seen a vet with reptiles do that, because it's just such a massive undertaking. But yet I've heard one guy say, well, you always need that. Well, the problem that I have with taking that one, is by the time you get that results back, that animal may already be dead from the disease. So you got to treat for something a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a challenge. I mean, until test kits and stuff comes out for certain things to test, right? I mean, it's kind of like COVID tests now.
Yeah, that's
you can go and buy one, but somewhere somebody's got to make a profit on developing those. So your biggest thing would be test developed for some of the more common herp diseases or things, because people are going to want to buy them if they're reasonable and start learning. You're never going to catch it all. I mean, but
how do we get the government to subsidize that like they do with the actual medications?
Yeah, it's just one of those things that's just hard to do, because the volume of people. I mean, the best thing to do in a lot of situations is to try to have disease-free animals before they're ever purchased, and know that. Get them on the front end before shipments are divided up and moved around.
See, I got my Peter Bandits skinks from the same dealer at the expos, and every single time I got them, they came with the same parasites. And it's a very simple parasite to get rid of, except for the fact that it takes 3 months, because the eggs take 3 months to hatch. And so I made sure to call the owner of the company and be like, okay, so this is what's happening in your Peter Bandit skinks. So this is what I'm seeing. And so when I knew somebody else that bought one, I made sure to mention that to them, like this. And that's the things, like you said, the failures that we have, we should be spreading that information.
Yeah, the more that kind of stuff gets out there, and the more people talk about it, the more likely things might change, And I'll just be honest. I mean, even in my 20 years in this job, and if you've been caring for herps a long time, you probably have seen some changes too. I mean, at least people are thinking about diseases.
Yeah.
Back in the early years, skin rot, some blisters, different things. Yeah, but things are being identified better now. We're at least understanding what is happening. Books have been written, so it's not like things aren't slowly changing. But at the same point, you kind of wish there was a lot of like pet industry people that had very good vets just for other species, too. And not to say there aren't some out there. I mean, some like doing them. I know some vets that love treating state snakes and stuff. They're almost more excited about those coming in because they don't get very many of them.
Yes, I saw that in my vet that I just found. Yeah.
And it's just like anything. It's a learning curve. I mean, just think about researchers like some of us and herpetologists or culturists. I mean, where to draw blood on amphibians and reptiles. I do it all the time. I mean, some seems cruel on certain things to do a heart puncture or getting it out behind the eyeball, but that's the best places. I mean, most things are pretty easy, but it's not. But it's not like a snake. You're not going to get 2 mils of blood off a snake that easy without hurting that animal. It's drops that you have to work with. It's not like you can get vials like you do for us, And so just those things in general. But I always find it fascinating when I draw blood on different animals for either looking at health concerns, because you can actually... There are labs out there that do basic health, white blood cell counts, red blood cell counts, lipid layers, all of that you take blood and have to send them into a lab. Of course, it's not that cheap. And they just basically give you back when you go to the doctor on what you get from your blood test, Then you got to decide who's going to interpret that for you. Because those values, you got to have baseline values of those, or know people that know what those values mean. But of course, if your blood cell counts or white blood cell counts are extremely high, or certain factors are different, that animal's fighting something. And those you can kind of tell. I mean, but some of the early books even, taking a drop of blood and putting it on a smear and having a compound microscope. You can look at, you can do a little bit of this if people just take the time to learn.
And it's really, I was really amazed at how easy it was to do a float fecal at least.
Yep.
Like I kept making sure, because all my animals were negative, and so I would take it to the vet just to make sure. Because if it's like, oh, well, no, this is positive, then I'm doing something wrong. And so I just kept doing that, and I just kept getting negative results. And finally my Peter Bandits came in, and they had a parasite. So it's like, okay. And then just look up how to treat it. Just using your general pincer, not a big deal. It's really fascinating how that's done. Yeah,
and I think it's the herpetoculture world. I mean, like you said, they need to document their successes, their failures, even start getting that out there. If there's bigger groups that are more united and understand that, they can, more release something more documented that's official more, that's just not a little one line on a Facebook line or Facebook post or something like that. I mean, that's kind of what you have to do. And it's the same thing with our Hellbender care. I mean, early on, we have protocols in place of how to treat for chytrid fungus, how to treat for this, how to treat for that. We know what chemicals to buy, what medicine to buy, what dosage based on the animal, how to anesthetize the animal. There's detailed protocols just for that one animal. So if we have an outbreak, we know what to do. We learn quickly. Chytrid fungus that people deal with. It's an aquatic animal. Hellbenders breathe through their skin mainly, but they have lungs. So they can gulp air at the surface. The first time before we even knew chytrid was in the wild in Missouri, and we had some animals die in captivity, the smartest thing we did in the first 24 hours was drop their tanks, 40-gallon tanks, from being full to this high, so they could lift their heads up and breathe. Because the fungus just suffocated their skin and they couldn't slough it off, and it was just building up and building up, so they can't breathe. We probably saved half the animals' lives just by doing that. And no one told us. Yeah. We just thought, and I was like sitting there going, y'all, they have lungs. They can breathe. I've seen Hellbenders in really warm water swim to the surface and gulp air like a newt will occasionally. Let's just do it. We have nothing to lose. And that's in our protocols. The first thing you do once you start seeing signs is give them an air pocket to breathe, but keep them in the water so they can just put their heads up just enough. So little things like that. But like when we work with endangered animals, I mean, it's just like you're saying, we do very detailed protocols for disease outbreaks. And then if these animals get chytrid, we know chytrid, the best way to treat it, you can treat it with chemicals and put them in there over 72 hours, but this is an aquatic animal. If you don't treat the environment that they're in, you're not going to solve your problem. So you have to treat the environment. Well, to treat the environment, you need to heat it up, because heat kills a lot of things. So what's the critical thermal limit of that animal? How much heat can it take? So how many days can that happen? Well, you think, do we know that answer? You'd be surprised. Go back in the literatures in the 50s and 60s. A lot of this stuff is published. It's just forgotten.
Yes.
And so you find that, okay, we know if we can get the water temperature to 92, Hellbenders can survive that up to this many days. We know this based on this study in the 60s. We'll drop it to 90. They need to be in this in 3 days. We'll acclimate them over multiple days. Or the other choice is we just raise it to 85, but they have to be in that 85 for a month. I mean, there's a big difference. I mean, do you want them in it for a month or you want them in it for 3 days? But at the same point, you treat this animal and you're treating it for a fungus to kill it. Well, what's going to happen to the bacteria when you're killing the fungus? It's going to shoot up because they keep each other in check. The bio layers of these animals keep their bodies in check. So you have to be ready, on guard, to treat the next infection to get things back in balance. And it's a balancing act, and you have to learn that. And it's hard to learn that. I mean, you learn it, we do, by trial and error, and we're documenting things and we put it on paper. But the same thing needs to happen with this kind of stuff from a treatment standpoint, just putting together the basic stuff. And what I've always learned is you start with the basics and get that, and over time you add. Yes. And as adding, I would always encourage people, you don't just add words, put the photos in. Some people are very good at reading words and understanding. A picture, other people are visual, and a picture helps support the words. And so like you're doing fecals, like a series of here's what photos, or a video on it, or just documenting it that way. And then over time, it's funny. You start off with a 5-page document, and within 10 years, it turns out to be 25 pages because you're slowly adding the things you can do, and you got to start somewhere.
Yeah,
and that's out there. But don't think there's not. There are big, massive volumes of books out there on amphibian and reptile diseases, but they're expensive, several $100s, and they're very scientifically written. In a lot of cases, they're hard, even terminology we're all going to be looking up.
yes,
But I also encourage people to, go back the other way and make it accessible to people and understandable to the masses that are purchasing such animals too. So, but I will always say we're in a better place now. It is improving. I think it will continue to improve. I think most people that really breed animals and they don't want their animals to die at all. I mean, they're probably taking some precautions everywhere, but there's always those that, I've never had one and this is my first one, and it's a learning curve for them too. And hopefully they can reach out to the right people to help them so that animal has good health and quality of life too in the long run.
yes. Yeah, that's an important topic. Do you have anything else to mention?
No, I would just say I will keep this stuff in mind that we talked about, because there might be an avenue with some organization down the line that really wants the help with maybe some simple disease protocols for some of that, and involving the right people in the herpetoculture world with those that are willing to try to compile it. I can definitely keep that in mind in meetings that I go to in the future, bring up things too. I mean, there's always talks about, the diseases that come into these. And if I, as a person that wants to protect the wild population of the wild, I don't want invasive diseases released into the wild that's going to impact our natives. I mean, that's our mandate, to protect our wild population. But at the same point, I think it's in the best interest of all of us. We don't want our pet animal to die. We want to take care of it. And so we need to think about those things in the long run. So we can always think about ways. I would encourage you, if you got more of a United Herpetoculture committee or group in the U.S., that they bring these up and start developing things. There's always ways to partner with different entities on different types of things, but they're going to have the herpetoculture. They're going to have a lot different knowledge than we're going to have. I'm going to be good with some endangered animals because we're trying to save them. They're going to be good with some other animals. They're going to have day-to-day on those. The knowledge, the knowledge of everybody is going to be different, but a lot of cases that's good. You bring a different perspective, just like chytrid fungus in your aquatic animal, and you've got lungs. Give yourself a chance to breathe, and your animal might survive. And simple. Sometimes it's something simple, and sometimes it's somewhat common sense if you think about it. Knowing their anatomy and their life histories again helps with that. And
so many people panic.
Yep.
And I've been through a couple situations where even my vet was like, wow, you didn't panic? Like, I don't, like, one of my Peter Bandits got a infection in his hand. I believe he's older. He's got some shed issues that have showed up. And so he got an infection from a bad shed, which is a common thing for, lizards, is just to have a bad shed for fingers. And so it just showed up, and he just got this big ball, and I can't find a vet, things like that. So it got worse, but I kept it from spreading. That was the best that I could do till I found a vet. And eventually it popped. And you're talking about blood everywhere. We're talking the scene from the horsehead scene from Godfather.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like literally left a banana-sized stain of blood. And I'm picking him up going, oh crap. Like like, oh crap, is he dead? Is he okay? Like, he's like, he opens his eyes. It's like, okay, so he's not dead. He's actually okay. So now I have to calm down and think about the knowledge that I have and use that knowledge. So I understand blood loss. You probably want to eat something. You probably want to get some electrolytes. You probably want some of these things. So that's what I did for him, just to make sure. And then I took those pictures and I sent them to the vet. And the vet was going to see him a couple of days later anyways for a follow-up. But yeah, it was just one of those graphic, horrifying things. But since I didn't panic and use the knowledge that I knew... So sometimes it's just taking a deep breath.
Yeah, I'm not panicking.
And thinking.
Yeah. And I would just say, just think about animals that are in the wild when they're sick or something. A snake fungal disease. What is that snake going to do? It's going to bask. It's going to bask. It wants that sunlight. It wants that temperature. Just like we get a fever. They want that temperature increase and shedding ability. Don't underestimate keeping an animal healthy, how good natural sunlight is for them. And don't think it's just for snakes and lizards and turtles.
Yeah, no.
Cricket frogs bask. A lot of frogs bask on the side of the wetlands. They get sunlight when they need it. If they're sick, they're going to want it even more. Animals, even though they're more fossorial, they still will get some of the sunlight, especially if they're probably not feeling well. So when things start happening like bad sheds, you know, there's all kinds of things you can do for sheds on the humidity and all that. But I would just encourage people to think about how that good natural sunlight, a little bit, taking your animal out in the long run might alleviate a lot of problems you might have and before they ever start.
This is why I'm a big fan of VizTech with what they've been doing with because he's actually got an LED that has UVA and UVB. This is why in every one of my enclosures right now that I can, until I move, I'll even do even more. I keep a UVB and a grow light that has UVA. I make sure, and you will watch that animal bask, and I like to separate them because I have seen the animals move more because of that. So it gets them more exercise. So we're actually healthier that way. And I don't think there's a lot of people that actually think about it like that. Well, the basking light gives UVA. Yeah, but they don't want to be under that all the time. Something I have found in my beardies, when it gets too hot, they have a tough time controlling their poop. So they'll usually poop in the enclosure where they don't usually want to. They just can't handle the amount of heat. It just happens. And that's a bearded dragon that's from the desert.
Yep.
So understanding where your heat should be, because too much poop can be just as bad as not enough pooping.
Yeah. It's again, you got to learn how the life history of these animals are. It's the same thing with a turtle and a basking light and stuff. You're too close, it's going to cause too many problems. You're too far away, it's going to cause problems. You got to find that ideal spot. And you got to have that nice spot where that turtle can really spread those toes out and just fan them out. And sometimes, I mean, we put these animals in fairly small cages because they can tolerate it, but bigger cages with different multiple basking sites that vary is the more important when it's said and done.
Multiples. Every time somebody asks me, what's the perfect substrate? Multiple substrate.
Yep.
That's the perfect substrate. It's like I got totes.
Yep.
I've got totes for the bearded dragons that have bioactive substrate of dirt and a layer of drainage, and I usually try to keep some plants in there for them to eat. But yet I have rocks on the outside as well as just paper towels, so I can just sanitize it like that, and they can get the full experience that they might want.
Yep. Well, it's the same thing in the wild. If we build something outside that temporarily hold an animal outside, we don't put it in full sun. It's built in a spot that has shade, has structure, it has a little filtered sunlight, and then it has full sun. Let that animal determine where it go, and watch that animal. That animal is going to be telling you what it really needs, and you might have to adjust that as the day. I mean, like I said, get good natural sunlight, but don't just put them in a cage and just let them out in full sun. If you're going to go out, let them have an hour here or there and be with them, or you put them in something that they can select. And sitting back and watching as they select as the day goes on will tell you so much about what that animal needs. So much. How much time is it really sitting in that sun?
Yeah.
And in that shade?
I had a vet tell us that, oh, well, bearded dragons need UVB all over the enclosure. It's like, no, I can tell you, I actually take my bearded dragons for strolls. I outfitted a stroller, and I take them down to Creve Coeur Lake, and I walk them around the lake because I live in a very crappy apartment. And some people have made fun of me for it. And it's like, I have 3 beardies. I have no space outside the apartment to let them roam. So this is the best way for them to get the natural sunlight. But I watch them. Eventually they'll get darker, and then they'll get lighter color, and then once they get that lighter color, I'll actually throw a t-shirt on them, or they have spaces that they can actually get into different baskets and stuff to actually get away from the sun.
Yep. And
these are desert species. I mean,
well, they have to get away from it too during the heat of the day at some point, and yeah, again, paying attention to that, paying attention to that slight color change in that animal tells you everything, because it's going from I'm trying to absorb sun to I'm trying to reflect it now.
Yes.
And people don't understand it's a slight change. Some animals it's a prevalent change. Some it's not. Some are adapted to lose heat different ways through their body a little more. All animals in the world are like that. Elephants have huge ears with wrinkled skin through it to help push heat off of their bodies because they're huge and stuff. So, but yeah, definitely
I have a hypothesis that if you take a bearded dragon outside to get some sun and it stays dark, like super dark for a really long time, your UVB in the enclosure is probably not good enough.
Yeah, probably.
There's a hypothesis there, so you can use that. I think we're coming to an end. I think this is probably... Yeah.
Yeah, I've got another meeting here pretty soon. So
I have just loved this conversation. You are just absolutely wonderful. This is really insightful and very educational, and I just love that. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yep, no problem. Hopefully it'll help in the long run.
Yeah, like I can't imagine this not. Like, yeah. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a good day.
You do the same.
Bye-bye.
Bye.